land development plan for Brambles West contingent upon the following conditions: addressing all township and county review comments, addressing all traffic review comments, PennDOT approval for use of Cross Gate Drive for access to the Carlisle Pike, prohibiting direct or indirect access to Richard Road and William Drive in perpetuity unless the otherwise approved by the Hampton Township Board of Commissioners in writing following decision at a public meeting, approval of the Director of Public Works, and adding in caveat in regards to the fire, the issue on fire, including possible stabilization of the property.
About whether it needs fire code.
Would you like to add the requirement that there be pedestrian gas
I'm
jet?
sorry, as well as in the final condition here, that it meets pedestrian, or that it meets
That the pedestrian access to Richard Drive
Right.
for school bus service or access to the school bus on site is acceptable to the school district.
Additionally, the special purpose fee for capacity at Pump Station 5 at $860 per EDU.
And meeting fire code requirements for the structure and 60-minute firewall.
There's three items, or is that included in my motion?
Clarification, fire code and stabilization was good. Is that all like compliance with fire code or stabilization? Okay.
Stabilization, I think, is
If
separate.
required by the fire code.
If required by the fire code,
So you've got those three extra provisions. We pedestrian access to Richard in regards to meets the satisfaction of the approval of the school district.
Right, or access to a bus stop approved by the school district.
Fire code requirements, and as well as the figure for stormwater.
Sanitary sewer.
Right.
Just the stabilization, I want to make sure we're clear on that because I'll be asked to make a final determination if all conditions were met. Stabilization is if it's required by the fire code. Yes, we can.
That's it.
Need a second to the motion.
It has to be done tonight.
Wait, motion for purpose of discussion.
Well, we got a motion on the floor.
Second.
Second.
Yeah.
Okay.
It
There's
has
a
to-
motion and a second.
If we don't do it tonight, here's the part of the difficulty. If we don't do it tonight, it takes effect immediately without any of the conditions. So we're stuck because we have conditions that they've agreed to, and we want to include. Those conditions are part of the motion. So if you don't approve something with conditions, the way I understand the law, it's approved.
Deemed approved.
Right, it'd be deemed
Deemed
approval
approved.
without conditions.
So there you are. You're stuck with, we have conditions that are very important to the folks, important to the township, and agreed to by these petitioners. So the only way that we can get the conditions in is to vote them in. As everybody said, it's, the issue is enforced. And we have to do it tonight because I think tomorrow's the deadline. So if it's not passed tonight, they have their approval tomorrow without any vote at all. Everybody gets it.
All right, there's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Folks, none of us up here, John, we just like it. We had no choice. And as we talked about last month, as I said earlier, sometimes the law requires us to do things that we don't want to do, don't like to do, but we're forced to do. But thank you all for being here.
item on our planning commission agenda is the preliminary final land development plan for 300 South Sporting Hill Road. Listen, Road. We have someone here to represent the planners. Please state your name and your affiliation.
My name is Mark Jones, Hardtech Engineering and Consulting. I'm representing the plan for the client, the SRS developers. They are,
Give us a brief overview of the plan.
the plan, actually, the project site is actually located directly south of where we are right now. The building's to the south here, it's the property, Township Building is right here, we're sitting here. The project is here, it's the property with the derelict homes and things there that are adjacent to the township property. The project consists of a multi-use building, 11 apartments, and 3,044 square feet of professional office space. It's been approved by the planning commission
It was
earlier.
recommended for approval of the plan.
Recommended for approval by the planning commission last month. With some minor waiver requests, we had a preliminary plan waiver request, the site being this small and no significant infrastructure being constructed. We requested to go directly to final plan. Marginal access street on this one, hopefully it's not as contentious. Mainly, we are asking for a waiver because we're blocked here by the federal government, that's the Navy base right here. And the township building here, there's no other way to get into or through this site except with the one access.
So we did discuss that at the planning commission about possible access to the township property at the planning commission. As you know, we're building across the street, and eventually this will be deciding on future plans here for this facility, and it would be, as Manager Metz asked at the planning commission, we'd be open to getting access through the township property, get you the light, and the developer, your owner, was not in favor.
At this point, no, he's
Did you not change your mind on that?
no, sir, at this point, no. We're familiar with some conditions of this property that may require him to do signal improvements for this access, because we don't know who's gonna own this in the future, because this will be up for sale when you guys move. So we're looking at, and this is where our stormwater facility is at this point, so it's really gonna be difficult to get through here at this point.
I apologize, but what improvements to the signal are you aware of? It's an existing permitted driveway, and I don't think you've changed the classification of the driveway.
We were meeting at PennDOT, and PennDOT met for this. PennDOT brought this up and indicated that the township would have to put some type of language in the deed of this, requiring signal improvements based on whatever project may take place here. That's just what we heard. My client was there, and we're like, okay, we don't want to get tied up with this.
And would you go over that again? PennDOT said what?
In a discussion that we had with PennDOT last month, this came up. And it was our understanding when the township was actually contemplating an HOP for this location and subsequently pulled their HOP permit in March, or February or March it came up, and it was pulled. But there was still some, at least what we understand, there was some lingering requirements that had, for the signal, there had to be something tied up with this property when it's conveyed. That's what we understood. Now, I don't know whether that's gospel or not, I'm not sure. That's what we heard. Well, my client hearing that, saying, well, wait, then we don't want to get tied up with this, because they're going to come and ask us for a contribution to this signal improvement, and he's not willing to do that.
And it far outweighs the interest of getting out through the lake.
Yeah. Plus, in addition, this is such a tight turn here, we don't know what this is going to do. And this is such a tight turn to get out of here at this point. There'd be a lot of improvements required to get, parking lot, actually, I'm parked right here. So, trying to get in and throughout this would create a lot of stacking thing. And we're only talking 11 apartments here, so we're not talking that many trips. But at this point, he declined to doing that.
Let's finish up on the last waiver request here, and then we'll get in here, Jeremy. Question.
There's a provision in the ordinance that requires that if we have all along an arterial street, we must dedicate we originally contemplated they had required 20 feet. This came up, we originally looked at it, and it was going to be a waiver from doing anything. And then township staff reached out to us before a meeting we had and said, no, there may be some improvements contemplated for Sporting Hill Road. So we went back and forth, and Mr. Miller, he was really good to work with on this, and he helped us out. He said, okay, we really can't support a whole waiver from it. We would like to a modification, which would be only 10 feet. So we had dedicated an additional 10 feet along here, in addition to providing a sidewalk. So we came up with that kind of balance, because 20 feet would have definitely killed it. I mean, at this point, this is no 40 feet. I think the requirement is to have a total of 80 feet on arterial roadways, and you're not going any further here. Otherwise, every house along here would become non-conforming.
Jeremy, do you want to weigh in on the three waiver requests?
Sure. The marginal access, I agree. The marginal access would only provide a benefit to the developer himself, as the property to the south is the Navy depot, and
You're not heading through there right now.
they're not gonna use that.
Did you ask the Navy?
And
The fence kind of put us, told us what we needed.
the property to the north, which is this building, is already a signalized driveway entrance, so there's no advantage to a marginal access other than to the property owner himself. Relative to the, I call it a modification to the requirement for dedication of additional right-of-way, we concur that in the future there's proposed to be a center turn lane for the entire length of South Sporting Hill Road. 10 feet additional right-of-way from this particular property will provide sufficient room for that to move forward in the future. We support the concept of not requiring the full 20 feet because we feel that the 10 feet would be sufficient to meet the future needs of the township for road improvements. And as far as preliminary plan, we have no concerns relative to preliminary plan, given the size and infrastructure associated with the project.
And Mark, you do agree with all the comments made by the planning commission, correct?
Yeah, we're in receipt of those, and we are certainly well aware of it.
Keith, any other questions here from your end?
Yeah, Commissioner Silcox. It was a comment that I had asked at the planning commission meeting about whether or not the developer for the proposed project would at least depict a cross-access easement on their plan, which would protect any type of improvements in perpetuity for the future possible connection to the traffic signal should the future owner of the property that the Township Building is located at wish to negotiate a reciprocal agreement.
That was also denied by my client.
You hear that, Keith?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, he
Mark
did.
said that his client denied that as well.
Is there a particular reason as far as needing what could be an easement for access that would preclude you from moving forward with your proposed plan?
It would pass right through the stormwater management facility that's already contained within the easement, first of all. And if that easement being seen by an adjacent developer, that's going to maybe create a problem. At least that's what he indicated to me. So
you're saying from a design basis, the property can't afford to depict that type of easement in the area, or are you simply avoiding the possible future negotiation of access to South Sporting Hill Road?
yeah, at this point, it doesn't. He felt that it was not prudent to show an easement at this point for that access. You're talking about the access coming in the north end of the parking lot there, adjacent to the township property.
You would design it however you wish for the ultimate approval of the board, but I just, if you're talking about the possibility of making a connection when and if improvements are required to that intersection and portion of South Sporting Hill Road, it seems to me like you wouldn't eliminate the option of vacating that easement.
At this point, though, then, you know, that easement could always be pursued by the adjacent property owner if they have a plan that contemplates it in the future north of the site. So if the township sells the property in the future they currently have, and the developer takes it over, and they want to propose a plan that would provide access to our property in the future, then they can approach us at that time.
Yeah, I'm not, so forgive me if the comment sounds ignorant, but I'm not buying that. I just think if you had any desire, because here we're dealing again with a situation where you know at this point in time, PennDOT's only going to permit a right in, right out.
Yeah, that's a given.
And it seems to me, forgive me for the comment, ludicrous to not at least provide an easement to which no one could ever force you to take advantage of. You could negotiate the terms of that cross-access easement at the appropriate time with the new owner if they were willing to.
I understand what you're saying, Keith, and I'm perfectly, you know, on board with what you're saying and agree with you, but I can't, if my developer at this point has said that that's not an option at this time, so I don't want to go against what he said.
Keith, can I ask a question real quick? Are you concerned about the easement for the potential of the property to the north accessing the property to the south? Or are you proposing that the property to the south has access to the property to the north to access the signalized driveway?
The property that's proposed for development at 300 South Sporting Hill Road depicts only on their parcel an easement that would afford for the possible future connection to the signalized intersection that exists at 295 South Sporting Hill. And if I'm missing the mark, say so. But
So he wants one.
I'm
He
contemplating
wants one here.
a number of offices and apartments that only have a right in, right out onto South Sporting Hill Road, and it just seems illogical.
But I guess my question is, Keith, is if it's to benefit the property being developed, they don't necessarily need to protect the easement because they'll own the property and then can grant themselves access to construct that if it's desired to in the future. Because they'll have control of the property.
That's fine as long as they're not, proposing a building foundation that would preclude that possible connection, and I don't have a plan in front of me.
There's not a building, there is a stormwater basin though.
All right.
Keith, anything further from your end?
No, not at this time, Commissioner.
Mark, any further comments in response to management's?
No, actually, you know, that was, that's fine. If there's anything else, we can, work it out as we go through the rest of the process. But here's no, it's time.
All the comments I have.
Anybody with anything else? Anyone from the audience?
So, sorry, I'm bringing this home. This is Shelley again. When I tell my kids to do something because this is the way it is, and they say, I don't want it, that's not acceptable. A right in, right out of here is just gonna cause increased traffic and turnarounds in Delbrook Manor. I don't live there, but I'm concerned about them too. It does not seem illogical to me to flip your plan around and have your stormwater over here and have your driveway come out to a traffic light, which will cut back on the cut-ins on Sporting Hill Road there. As far as waivers go, I think it's nice that we give waivers, but there's also a design for the property, and there are rules that we have implemented in here in the township. And if you can't comply with the rule, then change your design, change what what your plan is for the property. I don't think it's unreasonable to move your driveway.
Ma'am, if I may real quick, the reason why staff is supporting the waiver for the marginal access is because that marginal access street will only serve this property. And it will serve them to get to the signalized driveway up here. What is needed for this property to get to the signalized driveway is an easement from 230 South Sporting Hill Road. They can grant themselves authorization to make that connection at any time because they own this property, so there's no easement needed to protect that right. They'll have that right regardless because they own the property, they control the rights to the property, so there's nothing precluding them from in the future, when improvements are made to this signalized intersection, for them to connect to it. What will need to happen is if there's future land development of this property, there'll need to be a marginal access or a cross-access easement for this property so that to benefit the property to the south so they can access this. Essentially, they'd be granted an easement to themselves for future use, but since they control the property, the easement's not necessary. Does that make any sense?
I think what Shelley was trying to say, let me try, is that if you moved it up there, you'd be able to make a left or right turn, but I just don't think that's true. Am I saying that right?
Move the
If-
driveway?
Are you
If
saying move
you-
it here?
Driveway.
No, they-
No, if they flipped their plan around and instead of having the driveway go out to Sporting Hill Road, you already have offered that the owner can come into this parking lot, right? Is that what I was hearing?
No, that's not what you're hearing.
Oh,
No. The stormwater facility, there's a
Right.
stormwater basin here.
Yes.
Okay, the water has to run there,
right,
okay?
has to run somewhere.
It has to run somewhere, and the way the site geometry works, that's the best way to put it. This, getting to this point here, requires this property to grant an access easement to these people. Right now, the township owns this,
Right,
okay? And they will be subsequently putting this up for sale as soon as they move this over here to across the street.
but they own it now.
They own it now, but then once they do this, they don't wanna cloud the sale of this with an easement that this person may not want.
Oh, I didn't hear them say that, but okay.
Alright, so that's why my owner said no. It has to be this has to be here for PennDOT reasons to be farthest away from the signal.
You said no at this time, with the possibility that it could happen.
In the future, there may be a combined development agreement in the future, and if between Mr. Patel and these folks, whoever owns this in the future, there's nothing saying that when this plan comes in for you, in front of you, that there will be some agreement at that time.
But
Right now,
we own this, right? The
right
town.
now, if you look where that would come out, right there,
Mhm.
that's some of our parking.
My car's parked right here outside.
We're short of parking. Tonight, we had a hard time with parking. People had to park in the
And
back.
we don't meet our own ordinance on parking.
So right now, to take out our parking lot to give them access, see those spots right there?